You change your tone so you don't sound too harsh. You shrink your opinions so you don't seem difficult. You smile when you're tired, say it's fine when it isn't, and call it strength. And after a while you forget what your real voice even sounds like. Most people don't realize how much of themselves they give away just to keep the peace, just to avoid being judged, just to belong. But that quiet self-erasure adds up. One day you wake up feeling strangely empty, exhausted in a way sleep can't fix, carrying a weight you can't quite explain. And the truth is, that weight isn't life. It's the constant effort of trying to be acceptable in a world that never stops changing its expectations. The Stoics warned us about this long before the noise of modern life ever existed. They understood that when your sense of self depends on the reactions of others, your peace becomes fragile, and a fragile mind is easy for the world to shake. If these conversations speak to something real in you, something grounded in truth, philosophy, and inner growth, consider subscribing. It's a small gesture, but it helps us reach more minds like yours, and it quietly signals that you're walking this path with intention. Most people never realize the exact moment their life stopped belonging to them because it didn't happen with a loud failure or a dramatic loss. It happened quietly, in the thousands of tiny moments where they learned to adjust themselves to the moods of others, to shrink their truth when a room felt tense, to soften their voice so no one would feel uncomfortable, to smile when something inside them was breaking. And each of those moments seemed harmless, even noble, but taken together they formed a pattern of self-erasure so subtle they never noticed it forming, until one day they woke up and felt strangely hollow, tired in a way sleep could not touch, restless even when nothing was wrong, carrying a weight they could not name. And that weight was not life itself. It was the constant labor of trying to remain acceptable in a world that never stops changing its standards. Because when you build your inner stability on the reactions of others, your peace becomes a fragile thing, trembling at the edge of every conversation, every message, every glance. And that is when you begin to live as if the world is something happening to you instead of something you are moving through with power. If you slow down long enough to watch yourself honestly, not from the surface but from the place where your reactions are born, you will start to see how many of your choices are not choices at all. They are reflexes shaped by years of conditioning. When someone pulls away and your chest tightens, when silence arrives and your mind fills it with stories, when a shift in tone makes you doubt your worth. These are not events, they are triggers, and your nervous system has learned to respond to them as if your survival depends on it. So you adapt, you perform, you anticipate, you monitor, and after years of doing this, you stop knowing where your real self ends and your coping strategies begin. You call it being sensitive, being kind, being aware, but what it really is a life spent outsourcing your stability, and the cost of that trade is always the same: your freedom. Think about how often your mood depends on what someone else does, how easily your energy shifts based on attention, approval, rejection, or indifference. How many of your thoughts revolve around what you should have said, what you should have done, what they might think, what could go wrong, what needs fixing, and how rarely your mind rests in the simple truth of this moment, this breath, this body. Because the moment your peace is tethered to anything outside you, it is no longer peace, it is negotiation, and negotiations never end. They only grow louder until your inner world becomes a battlefield where every opinion has a voice and your own becomes the quietest one of all. But there is a moment, subtle and dangerous in the best way, when a different question arises, not what do they think of me, not how do I fix this, but why does this have so much power over me? Why does their silence disturb my sleep? Why does their approval feel like oxygen? Why does the thought of being misunderstood feel like a threat? And the moment you begin asking that question, you step onto the path of reclaiming yourself, because now you are no longer just reacting, you are observing, and observation is the beginning of sovereignty. From that observation, something inside you starts to shift. You begin noticing how often you abandon your own needs to preserve harmony, how frequently you trade your truth for belonging, how deeply you have associated love with self-sacrifice. And that realization is painful, not because you did anything wrong, but because you finally see the invisible prison you've been living in, a prison built not from walls, but from habits, from fears, from the ancient desire to be accepted. And once you see it clearly, you also see the key, because nothing outside of you ever truly held the power you believed it did. You were the one offering it, moment after moment, thought after thought, reaction after reaction. This is where the real transformation begins, not with changing the world, but with changing the place from which you meet it. Because when you stop handing your inner world to every passing moment, when you stop allowing each reaction to define your state, you begin to experience a new kind of strength. Not the loud kind that needs to prove itself, but the quiet kind that cannot be shaken, the kind that stays steady when a message doesn't arrive, when a plan collapses, when someone walks away, when life refuses to cooperate, because now your foundation is no longer built on what happens, it is built on who you are becoming. At first, this new way of living feels strange, even uncomfortable, because your identity was built around reaction, and when reaction disappears, you feel empty, unfamiliar, exposed. But that emptiness is not loss, it is space, and in that space your real self begins to return, the part of you that does not beg, does not chase, does not shrink, does not explain itself into exhaustion, the part of you that knows your worth without negotiation. And the more you practice staying rooted in that place, the more the world begins to lose its grip on you. The storms still arrive, the noise still exists, the chaos still moves around you, but it no longer moves through you, and that is the moment you understand the truth that will quietly reshape your entire life. Once that realization settles into your bones, you begin to see your entire past through a different lens. Every moment of pain, every rejection, every time you felt unseen or misunderstood was not breaking you. It was shaping the exact strength you were always meant to build, because without those moments you would never have been forced to look inward, never pushed to question who you were becoming, never challenged to discover the power that was always waiting beneath your fear. And that is when you stop resenting what happened to you and start respecting what it gave you, because the weight you once carried becomes the foundation you now stand on. And from that foundation you rise in a way that no approval, no applause, no external validation could ever create. You start noticing how the world reacts differently to you now, not because you changed your face or your voice, but because you changed your center. You walk slower, but with more certainty. You speak less, but with more meaning. You listen without the hunger to be heard. You observe without the urge to intervene, and people feel it. They sense something unmovable in you, something that does not lean, does not bend, does not beg. And the strange thing is, you are not trying to be strong anymore. You simply are, because strength was never about dominance or control. It was about stability, the ability to remain yourself regardless of what the moment demands of you. And this stability becomes your shield, because now when life throws its chaos at you, you don't collapse into old patterns, you don't spiral, you don't rush to fix what is not yours to fix. You meet the moment as it is, fully, honestly, without resistance, without denial, without fear. And that presence gives you a kind of power that no circumstance can touch, because circumstances only control those who believe they must be controlled by them, but you no longer live that way. You live from within, and from that place your decisions stop being driven by fear and start being guided by truth. There is a moment, quiet but undeniable, when you realize how much of your suffering was never required. How many nights you spent reliving conversations that were already over. How many days you lost worrying about futures that never arrived. How many pieces of yourself you abandoned trying to maintain connections that were never aligned with your growth. And that realization does not bring regret. It brings relief, because now you know the rules of the game. You understand that your mind is the gatekeeper of your experience, and once you take that role seriously, everything begins to change. You become selective with your energy, protective of your time, intentional with your attention, because you finally understand their value. Your focus shapes your future, your thoughts sculpt your identity, your habits build your destiny, and the moment you take responsibility for that chain, your life stops drifting and starts moving with purpose. Not loud purpose, not performative purpose, but deep, grounded purpose that does not require permission or explanation. It simply moves. And as your purpose strengthens, something else begins to dissolve. Your need to be understood by everyone, your urge to convince, to justify, to explain, to defend. Because when you are rooted in who you are becoming, misunderstanding no longer threatens you. It simply passes through. And from that place you experience a freedom that very few people ever touch. The freedom of being internally complete, the freedom of no longer negotiating your worth, the freedom of walking your path even when no one else is walking beside you. This is where the journey deepens, because now the work is no longer about changing your circumstances. It is about mastering your inner world, the quiet discipline of your thoughts, the daily training of your reactions, the moment-by-moment choice to remain aligned with your highest self, even when the world invites you to collapse. And this work is not glamorous, it is invisible. It happens in silence, in the pauses between stimulus and response, in the moments where no one is watching. And that is why it builds a kind of strength that nothing can steal. As that inner world stabilizes, you begin to notice something quietly miraculous happening around you. Your relationships start changing without you forcing anything. Some people grow closer, some drift away. Some reveal who they truly are when your energy no longer feeds their expectations, and you accept it all without bitterness, without drama, without the old ache of needing to be chosen, because you have already chosen yourself, and that choice becomes the axis upon which everything else turns. You stop chasing clarity from those who live in confusion. You stop seeking depth from those who fear their own thoughts. You stop offering your light to places that only know how to consume, and in doing so, you reclaim the parts of yourself that were once scattered across other people's lives. You start to move through the world with a different posture, not in your body alone, but in your mind. You no longer approach situations asking, "What can I get from this?" or "How can I survive this?" You approach them asking, "Who do I choose to be in this moment?" And that question transforms everything, because now your identity is no longer reactive. It is intentional, no longer shaped by pressure, but by principle. And as you practice living from that place, your confidence stops depending on results. Your worth stops depending on outcomes. Your peace stops depending on circumstances, because all of it now lives inside the only domain you truly command. There is a powerful moment when you realize how often you used to abandon yourself just to preserve connection, how many times you ignored your intuition to avoid discomfort, how frequently you silenced your truth to protect someone else's feelings, and that awareness could break you if you weren't ready, but now it doesn't. Now it strengthens you, because you finally see the cost of betraying yourself, and you refuse to pay it again. You learn that love without self-respect becomes self-destruction, that compassion without boundaries becomes exhaustion, that loyalty without alignment becomes bondage, and these truths do not harden your heart, they clarify it. From that clarity emerges a new way of living. You stop rushing, not because you lack ambition, but because you understand direction matters more than speed. You stop filling every silence, not because you have nothing to say, but because you finally know how to listen. You stop needing constant stimulation, constant noise, constant validation, because you have built something stronger than distraction. You have built presence, and presence becomes your greatest asset, because when you are fully here, you are fully alive, and when you are fully alive, nothing outside of you can command your soul. And as this presence deepens, you start to experience time differently. You are no longer racing towards some imagined future where everything will finally be okay. You are no longer clinging to a past that no longer exists. You are rooted in the only place where life unfolds, now, and from that place you begin to taste a peace that does not depend on conditions, a peace that holds even when things are uncertain, a peace that stays even when answers are delayed, a peace that does not break when the world refuses to cooperate. This peace is not passive, it is powerful. It does not numb you, it strengthens you. It does not disconnect you from life, it anchors you within it. And from that anchor, you can move freely, create boldly, love deeply, act decisively, because your inner foundation is no longer shaking. It is solid, unmovable, and that solidity becomes the quiet force behind everything you do. Eventually you look back at who you were and realize how far you have traveled, not in miles, but in consciousness, not in achievements, but in alignment, not in possessions, but in power, the power of self-mastery, the power of emotional sovereignty, the power of being at home within yourself. And that is when you understand, truly understand, that the greatest victory you will ever achieve is the one you win over your own mind. You are no longer surviving life, you are living it, deliberately, courageously, fully, and nothing and nobody can ever take that from you again. And from this place of inner mastery, you begin to sense how the world no longer rushes you, no longer presses against your chest the way it once did, no longer feels like something you must constantly keep up with because you are no longer chasing the world, you are standing within yourself, and that changes everything. The urgency dissolves, the pressure softens, the noise fades into the background, and in that quiet you finally hear the voice that was always there beneath the chaos. The voice of your own knowing, the voice that does not shout, does not beg, does not fear, it simply guides. And the more you listen to it, the more your life aligns with a sense of purpose that cannot be explained but is unmistakably real. You start noticing how easily others lose themselves in distraction, how they drown in their screens, their arguments, their worries, their endless hunger for more, while you remain rooted, steady, awake. And this does not make you superior, it makes you free, because you are no longer enslaved by the same invisible forces. You see the game for what it is, the endless pursuit of approval, control, and certainty, and you step off the board, choosing instead a life of presence, intention, and self-trust. And in doing so, you quietly inspire without trying, lead without forcing, and change the energy of every space you enter. As this inner strength grows, your tolerance for what drains you begins to fade, not because you become cold, but because you become clear. You no longer entertain conversations that leave you empty, no longer chase people who do not meet you with respect, no longer invest your time in paths that do not align with your becoming. And this clarity does not isolate you, it refines you. It brings into your life the kind of connections that nourish instead of consume, the kind of experiences that elevate instead of exhaust, the kind of work that fulfills instead of depletes, because when your standards rise, your life rises with them. There is a moment when you realize that you are no longer afraid of being alone, because you are no longer empty when you are by yourself. You have built a relationship with your own mind, your own heart, your own spirit, and that relationship becomes the source of your stability. You stop seeking completion in others. You stop looking for permission to be whole. You stop waiting for someone to save you, because you finally understand that you were never meant to be rescued. You were meant to awaken. And from that awakening, a deep sense of responsibility settles in. Not as a burden, but as a calling. You recognize that your life is not something happening to you. It is something you are creating with every thought, every choice, every response, and that realization is both humbling and empowering, because now you see the full weight of your influence, not only on your future, but on the lives you touch, the spaces you occupy, the energy you bring, and you begin to move through the world with a quiet reverence for each moment, knowing that every moment is shaping who you are becoming. You stop waiting for perfect conditions, you stop postponing your growth, you stop telling yourself that someday things will finally begin, because they have already begun. Right here, right now, in this breath, in this decision, in this awareness, and you choose to meet life fully, without reservation, without fear, without retreat, because you are no longer the person who hides from discomfort. You are the person who transforms through it. And in that transformation, something else becomes clear. Your past no longer holds power over you. Your regrets no longer define you. Your mistakes no longer imprison you, because you have integrated every part of your story into your strength. Nothing is wasted, nothing is lost, everything becomes fuel, everything becomes wisdom, everything becomes part of the foundation you stand on, and that foundation is unbreakable because it was built in the fire of your own becoming. Eventually, you reach a point where the world may still test you, still challenge you, still offer you uncertainty, but it can no longer command your soul, because your soul is no longer for sale. You have claimed it, you have guarded it, you have cultivated it, and from that place of inner sovereignty, your life unfolds with a depth, a richness, and a peace that nothing and nobody will ever be able to take from you again. By now you can feel it, the way your mind no longer collapses at the first sign of difficulty, the way your heart no longer panics when things do not unfold according to plan, the way your body no longer lives in constant tension, bracing for impact. Because something fundamental has shifted, you have learned how to remain with yourself, and that single skill becomes the foundation of everything else. When anxiety rises, you do not flee from it, you observe it. When fear appears, you do not surrender to it, you steady yourself within it. When doubt whispers, you do not obey it, you listen and choose differently. And that practice, repeated again and again, builds a resilience that life cannot erode. You begin to recognize how much of your old suffering came from fighting what is, resisting reality, arguing with the moment, demanding certainty from a world that never promised it. And now that struggle dissolves, you stop wasting energy on what you cannot control and start investing fully in what you can: your attitude, your effort, your integrity, your response. And as your attention shifts inward, your experience of the world changes outward. You no longer feel like life is happening to you. You feel like you are moving through life with intention, with awareness, with power. This inner power is not aggressive, it is grounded. It does not seek domination, it seeks alignment, and in that alignment you begin to live in harmony with your own values. Your actions start matching your beliefs, your choices start reflecting your growth, and the gap between who you are and who you want to be grows smaller each day, and that closeness brings a kind of peace that cannot be bought, borrowed, or broken, a peace that comes from knowing you are finally living in truth with yourself. You stop chasing emotional highs and fearing emotional lows, because you understand that both are temporary. You stop being controlled by pleasure and pain, because you have learned to sit with both without losing yourself, and that emotional maturity becomes one of your greatest strengths, because now nothing outside of you can dictate your inner state. Nothing and nobody can take your balance, your clarity, your direction, unless you allow it. You also begin to see others differently, not as threats or judges or sources of validation, but as fellow travelers on their own difficult paths, and that understanding softens your heart without weakening your boundaries. You can care without attaching, love without losing yourself, give without draining, because you have learned the art of presence without surrender, connection without collapse. From this place, your life starts to feel intentional. Every decision carries weight. Every moment holds meaning, not because everything is perfect, but because everything is conscious. You are no longer drifting through your days on autopilot. You are awake within them, choosing how you move, how you speak, how you respond, and that awareness transforms even the simplest moments into something sacred. Eventually, you look at your life and realize that the chaos that once ruled your mind no longer has access to you. The voices that once controlled your thoughts have gone quiet. The fear that once paralyzed your choices has lost its grip, and standing in the center of all that silence is you, calm, steady, unbreakable, finally living a life that nothing and nobody will ever be able to disturb again. As this new way of being becomes your normal, you begin to understand something most people never reach, that real freedom is not found in escaping responsibility, but in embracing it fully, because when you stop blaming circumstances, people, the past, or the future, you reclaim your power, and with that power comes a calm confidence that does not depend on outcomes. You stop asking, what if this goes wrong, and start asking, who am I becoming through this? And that question alone transforms struggle into purpose, difficulty into training, and uncertainty into possibility. You also start to notice how the mind loves to create drama when it has no direction, how it invents problems to feel important, how it feeds on worry to avoid the discomfort of growth. But now you recognize these patterns and you refuse to follow them. You give your mind a mission, a vision, a path forward, and with direction the noise quiets, the chaos settles, the endless inner commentary fades into focus, and you begin to experience a level of mental clarity that feels almost supernatural compared to your old way of living. This clarity changes how you make decisions. You no longer rush, you no longer hesitate. You move with a steady sense of knowing, not because you can predict the future, but because you trust yourself to meet it. And that trust becomes your anchor, no matter how intense the storm, no matter how uncertain the path, no matter how heavy the moment, you remain grounded in your own presence, and that presence becomes your home. From this home, you begin to act with courage, not reckless courage, but conscious courage, the courage to say no when you need to, the courage to walk away from what no longer serves you, the courage to stay when things are difficult but meaningful, the courage to speak your truth without needing it to be approved. And each act of courage strengthens your identity, each choice reinforces your sovereignty, until one day you realize that fear no longer runs your life. It may appear, but it no longer commands. You begin to see that the world is full of people chasing distraction, chasing approval, chasing control, while you have chosen presence, chosen purpose, chosen peace, and that choice places you on a different path, a quieter path, a deeper path, a path that leads not to more noise, but to more life, more depth, more meaning, more connection with yourself and the world around you. And in walking this path, you feel something rare and precious, alignment, the sense that your inner world and outer world are finally moving in the same direction, that your thoughts support your actions, your values guide your choices, your purpose fuels your effort, and from that alignment flows a powerful stillness, the stillness of knowing that you are exactly where you need to be, becoming exactly who you are meant to become. You are no longer chasing peace, you are embodying it, no longer seeking power, you are living it, no longer searching for yourself. You have returned, and from this place of return, your life unfolds with a quiet majesty, because nothing and nobody can ever affect you again, not in the way they once did, not in the way that stole your sleep, your energy, your sense of self, because now you belong fully to yourself. At this stage of your becoming, something almost sacred begins to happen. Your inner world becomes so stable, so rooted, that even when life tests you in ways you could never have predicted, you do not break. You bend, adapt, and rise again, because you are no longer relying on the fragile structures of approval, certainty, or control. You are standing on something far stronger, your own awareness, your own integrity, your own unshakable presence. And from that foundation, you meet each moment with a kind of grace that only comes from having survived yourself. You start to feel a quiet reverence for your journey, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. because every tear, every doubt, every night you thought you would not make it through was part of the forging of the person you are now, and that recognition fills you with a deep gratitude for your past, even the painful parts, because without them you would never have learned the lessons that now guide your life. You would never have developed the strength that now protects your peace. You would never have built the wisdom that now illuminates your path. And from this gratitude flows compassion, not only for yourself, but for others. You see how many people are still trapped inside their own storms, still drowning in thoughts they do not understand, still fighting battles they do not know how to name, and instead of judging them, you hold space. You move gently, you speak with intention, because you remember what it felt like to live there, and that memory makes your presence a gift. A calm in a world that is constantly in motion. Yet this compassion never pulls you back into old patterns, because you have learned the art of caring without carrying, loving without losing, giving without draining, and that balance becomes your signature, the way you move through life with an open heart and a steady center. And the more you practice this way of being, the more natural it becomes, until one day you realize that peace is no longer something you visit. It is something you live. You no longer chase happiness. You cultivate fulfillment. You no longer fear change. You flow with it. You no longer resist uncertainty. You trust your capacity to navigate it. And with that trust, your life becomes an expression of quiet confidence, not the loud kind that demands attention, but the deep kind that commands respect because it is rooted in truth. The world may continue to spin in its chaos. People may come and go, circumstances may rise and fall, but you remain anchored, awake, present, and in that presence you experience the rare freedom of being fully alive, fully yourself, fully at home within your own being. This is the moment when you understand, with a clarity that does not fade, that nothing and nobody will ever affect you again in the way they once did, because you have crossed the threshold from reaction to mastery, from survival to sovereignty, from confusion to clarity, and that crossing cannot be undone. And now you stand in a place that once felt impossible, a place where your mind is no longer your enemy, where your emotions no longer rule you, where the outside world no longer dictates your inner weather. And from this place you finally understand what it means to live, not as a reaction to life, but as a creator within it, because your thoughts are no longer chains, they are tools. Your feelings are no longer storms, they are signals. Your experiences are no longer burdens. They are teachers, and everything that once threatened your peace has become part of the strength that protects it. You move through your days with a calm that does not depend on outcomes. You speak with a clarity that does not require approval. You make decisions from alignment instead of fear. And when challenges arise, as they always will, you do not collapse. You respond. You do not panic. You prepare. You do not surrender. You rise because you have built something inside yourself that cannot be shaken by circumstance, something that cannot be taken by loss, something that cannot be broken by uncertainty, and that something is your self-mastery, your emotional sovereignty, your unbreakable awareness. You see now how far you have come, from a life once governed by reaction, by doubt, by the constant hunger for reassurance, to a life now guided by presence, by purpose, by deep inner trust. And this journey was never about becoming someone else. It was about remembering who you truly are beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the layers of conditioning that once told you your worth was negotiable. And in remembering, you reclaimed yourself. And so as you step forward from this moment into whatever waits for you next, you carry with you the one truth that will shape every chapter of your life from here on. The truth that no person, no situation, no event, no circumstance holds authority over your inner world unless you grant it. And from this knowing comes a freedom that cannot be explained, only lived. A freedom that whispers through every breath, every choice, every step you take. Nothing and nobody will ever affect you again, not because the world becomes softer, but because you have become stronger. Not because life stops testing you, but because you have learned how to meet every test with a steady heart and a clear mind. Not because you no longer feel, but because you now choose how you respond, and in that choice you claim the highest form of power available to a human being. No matter what you're facing right now, remember this: nothing and nobody gets to own your peace unless you hand it over. You are not here to shrink, to perform, or to survive on approval. You are here to become steady, clear, and free. Let today be the moment you stop carrying what was never yours to hold. If this message connects with you, I invite you to continue the journey. Watch one of the videos on your screen. The next step might be exactly what your mind needs. And thank you truly for being a part of Psychresto Mind.